Hi, my name is Carrie DeLiz-Lavin. I am co-host of Bitcoin to the People, formerly known as Married to the Money. Quick updates. So obviously we changed the name. We wanted to really make sure that we were getting the point across that this is a Bitcoin podcast. And, we wanted to get some different kind of experts in different areas on so that, we could start to really go deeper into the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So, just a heads up, we are now Bitcoin to the People. I'm really excited about the guest that we have for today's episode. His name is Kent Halliburton, and he is a co-founder at a company called Sazmining, which basically provides mining rigs. It provides hosting. They do everything so that regular people can invest in Bitcoin mining. I learned a lot on this episode concerning energy. We talked about corruption in the Federal Reserve. We talked about ESG and if it actually means anything at all. And really how Bitcoin can really support the climate. For the future. Also, misinformation about Bitcoin and it being bad for the environment. This is just not true. So I hope that you enjoy the episode. We've got some really exciting guests on the next few weeks that are booked. So Bitcoin to the People. Check us out. Here is the episode. All right. So good morning, Kent. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Yeah, it's a great morning here in the Amazon.
Wonderful. So you mentioned that the Amazon is in the background, and this is giving me like a really modern, cool, fancy treehouse vibe.
It's not far off. So construction here. First of all, I'm in Peru, on the east side of the Andes mountain range, in what's called the high Amazon or the high jungle.
Wow.
And here, because my wife has an internship at a specialty clinic that treats addiction.
Wow.
Using a variety of traditional Amazonian therapies and psychotherapy. Very austere, rigid, clinical place, but it just fortuitous. We decided to do it for a year and move the family from Portugal to here, and that's where we are.
That is amazing. Wow, you live a very interesting life. I'm here in New Jersey, so I was like, all right, we'll keep the focus on you and on Bitcoin and Sazmining. So just to get a little bit of background on you and let's start with you and your background and how you kind of stepped into the Bitcoin space and then decided that mining was going to be, your thing.
Well, I think that actually ties together with the interesting life. So I was in the solar industry from 2005 to 2014. And that, I had a big drive to help out with climate change and just saw solar as the solution. And sometime in 2011 or 2012, I sort of had this epiphany where I realized that it actually, the solar industry itself wasn't going to be successful by itself, because the money was actually that underlied the entire economic system was messed up. And I got sort of disheartened and burnt out at the same time, and always had a dream to travel. So I started traveling, and I shifted to international business consulting, and did some work along the way. And eventually met my wife in Peru, which is where I'm at now. And she was Portuguese. And so eventually that led to planting roots in Portugal, and tried my hand at some entrepreneurial activities in the Bitcoin space. And for a couple of years, just was spinning my wheels and just met the classic entrepreneurs, you got to sort of get punched in the face several times and pick yourself up before you realize that's part of the journey. And I was thinking, okay, I've got this energy solar background. How do I lean into this and tie it with my Bitcoin passion? And it just seemed just stupendously obvious to me, hey, Bitcoin mining and solar are going to collide, and not just solar, but renewable energy. I was just happened to be a year or two ahead of the curve that I think now a lot of people are waking up to, that Yeah, it was just obvious. And so I heard Will, who's the founder of Sazmining, speaking on a podcast, a solar podcast with somebody that I knew. And I just reached out to Benoit. That was his name. He's got like the #2
Oh
solar
yeah, I met him in
podcast.
Miami.
Yeah, he's turned into an advisor now, but he's like, yeah, let me introduce you to Will. And so he introduced me to Will, and one thing led to another. We raised some capital and we built a platform that we're now out in the marketplace with. You've decided to sign up for to start your Bitcoin mining journey, and really that platform was created to scratch our own itch. Where we just looked around and we're like, Bitcoin mining is way too complicated. It doesn't need to be. Like, let's solve that for the average person.
Yeah. No, and I think you guys are doing such a great job of it. Like, I love the sort of gradually then suddenly that Bitcoiners mostly go through, where you're like, okay, I'll like get some cash back here. I'll round up my change into Bitcoin with this app. I'll buy some. I'll do cold storage. I'm like, it's kind of like this this trajectory that I was like, I've been reading about mining like way too much. I'm like, I'm not going to understand it until like I get my hands on it. That's how I felt. I was like, so maybe I'll meet someone who has a mining farm or kind of join a mining pool. Like, that's where I was in my head, but just very like, it's something that I want to do. And you guys are making it super accessible for, just the average Bitcoiner to mine efficiently. So that's what I've been doing some reading on articles that Will has done. And it's like, there's this big difference between scale and efficiency and doing at-home mining for the sake of mining and being like, yeah, it's not really profitable. I might burn my house down, but I'm mining Bitcoin. I'm like, yeah, that's not great. That's not going to be great for adoption. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about like exactly what Sazmining can do for like an individual that's looking to jump into Bitcoin mining.
Well, yeah, I think you said a couple of interesting points there, Carrie, that at least for me is part of why we created this platform. That accessibility was definitely top of mind. We just didn't think, I've said it before to you, and people probably get sick of me saying this, but there were ride sharing apps before Uber came along, but it took that experience for suddenly people to say, oh, wow, like ride sharing is not such a problem. And in fact, instead of it being a zero-sum game for ride sharing, which everybody just looked at the taxi industry, the entire space and market blew up. And we think the same thing's going to happen here with Bitcoin mining. And we think that we've got the ability to make that level of accessibility that Uber did for ride sharing possible with Bitcoin mining. And so that's what we've approached it with, because God bless them. There's always going to be people that are mining at home, and I want that for the network. I think that's amazing. It should be done, but it frankly is just not something that everybody is going to do. And the primary reason for that, which you did touch on, besides like the fire safety danger, like a lot of people just like literally, it is a genuine thing, because the amount of power that these things draw is the equivalent of 3 microwaves all plugged into the same socket. And a lot of people don't realize that to do that requires a bigger breaker, bigger wire cables. Like, unless you develop that sort of infrastructure, like you really can create fires. And so there's a danger to that. And I mean, I'm talking top of the line mining equipment. You can go with other solutions, but anyhow, there are some serious complications. And so we came along and we just said, this is actually quite obvious, the solution, which is that people can't get access to very low price mining rigs or low price power, especially clean green power. And the easy way to solve that is by aggregating customer demand. So what we do is we have a wait list where customers pay $100 upfront for each mining rig that they want to reserve. And that puts them on a wait list, and that allows us to know that we've got people that have some actual skin in the game and want to move forward with a mining rig purchase once we've fully developed the facility and made it available. And so what that means is that in the background, we've got our first facility being developed right now. It will be launched in September, and will have or it will be powered by hydropower in New Zealand. And what we'll have is the entire facility will be up and operational. And at that point, we'll say, hey, time to purchase your mining rig. And we'll just match our customers with the individual mining rigs that are in there. And it's their mining rig, their Bitcoin, and we sell everything actually at cost. So we are going to offer the mining rigs at cost. So basically just cover the costs of the facility, all the hardware, no markup. We're not trying to make any money on the hardware component of things.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to make any money on the power, because there's ongoing power costs to power the mining rig, right? So all the insurance, maintenance, everything, we're going to wrap it all together and just pass it through to the customer at cost. And how we make our money is to take less than 15% of the mining rewards for ourselves. So we do that by just telling the mining pool to split off 15% of the rewards. So we actually don't touch any of the customer's Bitcoin. The customer's Bitcoin comes directly into their wallet, your keys, your wallet.
Yep.
And then we receive 15% into our wallet. So it's just a revenue split. And what I think is really beautiful about that is that it makes things very competitive on the front end for cost wise, and it aligns incentives perfectly, because if your mining rig is not producing Bitcoin, we're also not making any Bitcoin for ourselves, and we're not making any money on the whole proposition. So I was actually talking with a customer the other day that was talking about a competitor where he didn't understand why, but like his mining rigs went offline for like 4 days and got popped back up. Everything's fine, but in those 4 days, he didn't earn any Bitcoin. And for us, that would be a tragedy, and we'd want to communicate that, because we're not making any money either. So I think that alignment of incentives is particularly powerful for us.
Yeah, and I love the transparency. I think that's something that I went to order some kind of face cream the other day, and they did a full breakdown of like, we have minimal packaging because we don't want you to pay for packaging. We want you to pay for skincare. And I think the internet froze. So what I was saying is I love the transparency, that like you do that breakdown, and it's people can dive into things. I don't think there's anything like, there's nothing wrong inherently with like at-home Bitcoin mining. And I get this sense of like the energy of a lot of Bitcoiners is like an entrepreneur, like very entrepreneurial, and they'll just like jump in. And you guys are saving people sort of like that headache. And the transparency, I think, like understanding like the cost of goods, that's something that more businesses really benefit from, like showing up front. So I think I froze, but I had said, I was looking to buy face cream, and I had like a full breakdown of like, you're not paying for packaging, you're paying for, for face cream. And I think that is super important with something like mining that has so many considerations related to the cost, and people knowing like the expectations are set up front, which I think is really cool and helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And also like in this space, there's been just a lot of like scammy things that have happened, this concept of like cloud mining and obfuscation. And we just think that to actually be a new competitor in the space, that it's actually just a competitive advantage, and will help people validate that, hey, we're legit. We're not trying to scam anybody here, because we know long-term that if we're going to create a long-term business, like we got to be in this together. Right. So short-term disease is not part of our thinking. We're setting ourselves up for the long term with our business model. And I think, as much as this is attractive to Bitcoiners, I actually think the passive income stream will be very attractive to others outside the Bitcoin space. And we did a bunch of testing of our product initially, and we saw a couple of really interesting things in testing with just a wide variety of users. What we saw is that people that would otherwise have been looking at passive income streams from like Airbnbs, for instance, are saying, wow, this is actually a way easier alternative for a great passive income stream. And then secondly, what we also saw, which was really fascinating, is that women were actually much more attracted to our product than they were to outright purchase Bitcoin. And it took me a little while to get my head wrapped around that. But, just broadly speaking, like the risk tolerance for volatility for men and women is different. Mm-hmm. It does just break down gender wise that, and it doesn't apply to every single man or woman, but in general, women are a little bit more conservative with price volatility. And if you think about our product, you're buying a mining rig, but you're cost averaging Bitcoin. So the price of the Bitcoin, it's roughly $10,000 and it pays for itself in a year. So you're spending that $10,000 to acquire Bitcoin over the course of the year, rather than putting 10,000 into the market today, and then you're like on the roller coaster ride with the Bitcoin price for that full 10,000.
So yeah, the gender breakdown. I mean, there just is, like, the risk tolerance, the considerations. It just is different. And I think if there is a way to speak to that, yeah, it draws people in naturally. Like you and I spoke about on, I think on our one of our first calls, was just the idea of, I was a little bit unclear. I'm like, I understand the wanting to buy the shovels and the picks during like the gold rush kind of thing, but like how could I paint that picture for someone else? And speaking to my parents, and I'm like, well, if you put 10,000 down in year one and you don't have to do that in all of the following years, you're buying your future profits up front, essentially.
Yeah.
So
it's actually really interesting because to hear you say that, because it's actually probably one of the core problems that I've been wrestling with our business. Is I see our product and I see it very simple and easy, but I think people have this concept of what Bitcoin mining is in their heads, and it's like all this garbled bells and whistles and gears and claptraps that when I try to describe how our product, which is quite simple to people, it's like they get confused by the simplicity of it. It's like, no, really, you're just buying a mining rig, it's yours, and you get the Bitcoin. And wait, how does that work?
Yeah, no,
that's it.
Yes. And I think, that also speaks to what you were saying around, like, people have been scammed, like getting wrecked as part of your journey, whether that is like with altcoins or with trying to dive right in and do too much at once, having, over allocating. Like, getting wrecked doesn't need to be as big of a part of your journey. Everyone's going to get wrecked at some point. Like, it's going to happen. Don't let it veer you away. But you can mitigate some of that. And it really is that simple. It really also is, like, if everything around Bitcoin is feeling too complex outside of like that learning journey, but like the actual, just putting things into action, it might be time to like ask someone for help. And Bitcoiners are super helpful. I'm like, man, in any other industry, someone would send you like an invoice before they even would talk to you. And like, here, I'm like, you can go on Twitter and go in someone's DMs and they will very likely answer you and maybe even be like, hey, do you feel comfortable with that? Do you want to get on a call? I can help you. I can walk you through it, which is really cool. So I think you guys are contributing to that in a big way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it is an interesting part about like the Bitcoin culture itself, is this desire to help. And I actually think it's because of the Bitcoin network, because if you think about it, we're sort of all incentivized to help people understand this, to become long-term holders, because it's the long-term holders that actually wind up supporting the price and allowing it to move up. And so we all win when the price moves up, right? So I was looking at a chart just recently, and the curve is going like long-term holders, like the amount of supply that's available, it's like just like dropping off of a cliff. Like at some point, there's just not going to be even very many Bitcoins available to be sold until the price goes up. And then some people say, okay, I want to sell a few here. So I think this incentive to like try to get people to understand this, because it's like once you go through the like the Alice in Wonderland moment and get to the other side of the curtain, and start to look back, like once you get Bitcoin wrapped around your skull, like you wind up actually being able to turn around and look back on like existing reality and just start to see it for what it is, in this way that you're just like, my gosh, I don't want to be over there anymore. Like this place is being created over here with Bitcoin is way better. I get to take the value that I have created in life, and I get to go store it in this encrypted energy that is just stored forever. And I don't ever have to worry about what the politicians do, or what the oracles at Delphi that we call the Federal Reserve, what they're going to say to us when they shake their stick and rattle their shells and tell us, which way the wind is blowing. Like, you don't have to worry about any of that. And I think actually too, like that level of security is actually making like some of the Bitcoin voices like some of the sanest and loudest out there right now because they just don't give a rat's arse about what they're saying because, hey, I know you can't actually take my Bitcoin from me. Like you just can't. I'm sorry. And that like creates this like level of security with like your wealth and your savings. It's just like, I'm just going to be me.
Yes. No, it really, I know people have different opinions on like Bitcoin maximalism. And I'm probably just too lazy to be a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm a Bitcoin only, but I'm not constantly like agitating and debating for it. But I can understand why it exists. Maximalism gets shit done, and there's certain things that kind of come up that I'm like, I don't know, are things like NFTs and, altcoins that are just completely gambling. I'm like, do they start to like damage what we're creating over here? Do they start to kind of, because someone on the outside's kind of just basic knowledge is it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you. I'm like, I think there really is something to being like, wow, maybe I'm not going to express, just feeling that free and getting on Twitter and dunking on people. But I'm like, man, you feel it. You're like, no, I could not be any more secure in like, we may go through a rough patch for the next few years, but like the future is incredibly bright.
Yeah, no, fully agree with you. And I think the maximalism thing is kind of funny myself. I mean, I have these beliefs, but I'm not, I think that it sort of allows some people to be unhinged and dunk on each other. But I actually don't think that that's what it's about. I think it's just that sense of security to be yourself that is so empowering. And I do think that, it's going to be rocky in a wild few years. I don't think that we've hit the peak of this sort of chaotic life period that we're living in, which I hate to say that because I wish it were all behind us, but I just don't see how it is with how much money is being printed and what inflation's doing. I mean, it actually broke my heart a little bit as I was walking on the streets of Miami at the Bitcoin 22 conference. Like, so I'm a US citizen, but I'm not living in the US. And so I just get these scattered little windows into the culture when I'm there. And I had this moment where we were walking outside the conference, walking by like a McDonald's, I think. And there was this tall man there, and he was just like yelling at people. And you could tell like the tone of his voice was like, I'm literally hungry. Like genuinely hungry. And those sorts of things I was just like really get to me, because it's like, no, that's what inflation is doing. It's theft, it's making it so people can't afford to eat. And frankly, if you look at like even like the French Revolution that happened in what was like the 1700s or something, it happened because of starvation. And we are heading for a similar sort of time. When you hear people on the streets that are kicking social norms aside and just say, I'm hungry, feed me.
It's very different from a faux culture war outrage. Being hungry, because the thing is most people aren't outraged by a culture war thing. They it's much more performative than anything else, because they're not willing to get in the ring and get dirty, to fight for it. Hunger is something different. I mean, you can see it in Shanghai. Like, this is a culture that is under complete surveillance, 24/7, to get a citizen there to like step out of line. I'm like, I mean, you have like the one person I can think of who did it, like Ai Weiwei, is like exiled for life. He'll never see his mother again. Even like CEO billionaires, they don't have, that doesn't mean anything there. But now people are hungry. Like, they're like, I don't give a damn about like the threats, the surveillance. They're like, because the last big uprising there was Tiananmen Square, so they know like what is at risk, and they're like, but you're hungry. Like, that takes precedent over everything else. They're like, if I'm gonna die anyway, one of these two horrific ways. So I think that's severely underestimated by people. And I just learned that like the Arab Spring, it was the rising food prices that kind of eventually broke the back. And I didn't know that. I don't know what I know. I don't know why I originally thought the Arab Spring happened, because it was so, it's 10 years ago, but I definitely did not think it was because of food prices.
No, most people just aren't aware of the fact that inflation is typically behind almost every regime change. It precedes it, because you get to a certain point where, there's two major factors that I see that cause changes, like dramatic shifts. It's like that gradually then suddenly statement is totally right. Because when people get to the point where they're willing to put their personal bodily harm on the line, that comes at the point of not having food and getting to starvation. It's like, okay, I'm going to throw my body into the mix now to get this solved. Yeah. That's one of the ways. And then the other way is violence. Just whoever wields the upper hand in violence tends to dictate the terms. And so I see this clash that's coming right now, and it is being preceded by inflation. And here, as horrible as that may sound, like there is this lifeboat to actually exit that entire system that's just like sitting there like a lighthouse on the hill, that all these individual people are just saying, hey, look, this is the Bitcoin lighthouse over here. Just come in. You can avoid this whole game that's going on and just sit on the sidelines. And then the people that we're saying this to are just like, hey, you're crazy because you think Bitcoin is so safe and secure, and what happens when the government regulates it and destroys it? It's just like, you don't understand, like it can't be done. Like the way the network is designed, it just literally can't be done.
No, we can't. We cannot vote our way out of this. We cannot. I love like the very crass wing of like the Libertarian Party, like the Mises Caucus. They're like, yeah, go vote harder, that'll work. And I'm like, like that will be the next campaign slogan, because it's like, just go vote harder. And I'm like, yeah, we can't vote our way out of this. It's kind of like, it's like with anything, when you kind of when you realize you're like, there's just nothing here that we can work with the current foundation. And also, empires are reborn all the time. I don't know that, in the last 2 years, I really learned, like the how empires function and over time. So it doesn't mean that like we're not going to have a US or Europe, but it's going to look very different. And I do think that Bitcoin will be at the forefront. And the Bitcoin mining is just, I was telling my husband, I was like, yeah, it's kind of like you're literally minting your own money. Like, and it's not to be like the Scrooge McDuck kind of way. Like, it's not that. It is in a way like, yeah, you're creating that for yourself. And there's just something, I'm not the most articulate around mining, but just there's just something really powerful around that.
It is. And it's interesting because from my very early days in Bitcoin, I saw people like asking about mining. And we've roughly estimated that to do it profitably as an individual, you need about $5 million in 7 months in order to get a whole facility set up and get that low cost power and low cost mining rigs. And it's just completely inaccessible for individuals, which is how we came about deriving Sazmining. But that concept of owning your own money printer is powerful. And it really resonates with people. People want to own a money printer, and that's actually what we're offering. And what I find really fascinating is a lot of people, it takes, like I was talking about, going through that Alice in Wonderland moment, getting on the other side of the screen and then looking back. But when you do that with Bitcoin mining, you actually have to take a moment to compare to what is it competing against, right? Mm-hmm. So Bitcoin is an emergent form of money, and building a new financial stack, right? Like is being built on top of Bitcoin. What is the base of our current financial stack? The US dollar, right? So if we look at the US dollar, what controls and look exactly at what Bitcoin is doing, Bitcoin mining is doing two things, right? It's creating the new Bitcoin and it's securing the network. So how is that being done in the US dollar side? New US dollars are created by the Federal Reserve, which is 8 to 12 older white dudes, unelected bureaucrats that sit around in a room and decide how many zeros exist in a database. I know there's more nuance to it than that, but if we abstract it away, it's basically what it is.
Yeah, the overarching, because I'm like, now you're hearing the same thing, right? With like student debt cancellation. They're like, well, it's a database with like ones and zeros in it. So I'm like, even whatever side, because I'm like, I'm just like so done with the like side. I'm like, it's not sides, it's a system. Doesn't matter who's in charge. But I'm like, yeah, if there's that much consensus, but it's just the like what the problem is, like mining could be really attractive to to many people if they could understand it. And democratizing access to that is just, yeah, it's really very cool. And the creation of the new money that gets to go to, the people who are closest to that money printer.
Absolutely. So then rather than having like this group of people that sits in a room and adds zeros to a database, that same function is being replaced in Bitcoin by individuals putting up capital for proof of work. So you have to work to get the $10,000 that it takes to own a Bitcoin mining rig. And then the mining rig has to work and use energy in order to acquire Bitcoin. So it's fair rules that anybody can participate in. The rules are set. It's not an arbitrary, capricious method of money creation, which is what we currently exist in. And what I particularly love about that is these rules obey the laws of physics. Like, I know that this sounds like absurdly like basic, but it took me a long time to realize it. Like, I talk about having a thick skull. We divorced ourselves. Our monetary system divorced itself from the laws of physics in 1971, when the US dollar was no longer back to the gold standard.
Yeah.
And you can look at all the charts. Like, basically the US culture has just become unmoored from reality as a result. Like, we took a fictitious story and we kept it running, and we burned ourselves up into the atmosphere. And now humanity, the US culture is going through, and humanity at large is going through this process of being sobered up and having to come back to realize, like, hey, we have to obey the laws of physics. And I think that's a painful process to go through a hangover and sober up, right? Like, nobody likes that. But that to me is akin to what's going on in our culture right now, and why so many people are like willfully ignoring what Bitcoin is because, let's keep the party going. Hand me another beer, please. It's not in everybody's self-interest to sober up. I think that the quicker you do and the quicker you get your feet back on the ground, the better off you're going to be, and the more money you're going to have in your pocket in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. Man, I could talk to you for hours about this, but I know that we're on like a time crunch, but I'm going to go just like completely ambush my parents and my godmother and my brother. They're going to be like, there will be some consensus, and they're like, can we just eat dinner though? Can we get back to it? I'm like, can you buy a little bit more Bitcoin? All right, so I have one more question related to energy that my husband wanted to ask. So we're not doing 2-on-1 interviews yet, because he's like, you interrupt too much. I'm like, all right. He's like, but I am curious, what is your preferred energy source for mining, for extracting from, and why?
So I don't think that I've got a preferred energy source.
Okay.
I don't think that framework makes sense to me. I think how I look at it is more of so I'm going to have to give some bigger context here, but the way I look at it is, like, I got into both solar and Bitcoin mining with the eye towards like climate change. And I know that in the US is still a very like controversial topic, but to me, it's pretty clear that we've got one solution to climate change, to reining in the heat situation, which is that if we want to keep the standard of living that we've got to electrify the grid and reduce the amount of carbon we're putting out. Like, that's the equation, right? And it's not much more complicated than that, but electrifying the grid actually means that we're going to need to produce more electricity. And we are actually going to need to consume more electricity, right? And the way that we can go about doing that, it's a three-legged stool. And the first one is to reduce the carbon is we're going to need renewables. There's no way around that. But in order to use renewables, we have to overbuild them. Like 1 megawatt of coal is not the same thing as 1 megawatt of solar. Like, and it's really basic, but people miss this, is that when you have 1 megawatt of solar, your energy source and fuel is the sun. Versus when you have 1 megawatt of coal, your fuel source is ancient sunlight that's been compressed in plant matter and compacted into this dark black carbon mass that then creates steady energy, right? So we have some volatility with renewable energies, and we just got to manage around that. But it's lower carbon. So that's the renewables leg. The second leg is, okay, now we need steady power on the grid to help with that volatility. Where does the steady power come from? Well, the steady power comes from a couple of different sources. Nuclear and then some form of storage to help smooth things out as well. And those storage sources are likely batteries and hydrogen, both of which are still kind of on the edge of economical, but nuclear certainly is economical right now. So those are the two energy production sources that we've got to have that help us drop carbon. The third leg of the stool is Bitcoin mining, just full stop. Because you need something that underlies the market that helps absorb any excess electricity that would otherwise go to ground. I mean, I don't think that people realize when they hear this fancy term curtailment, what that means. Yeah. Curtailment means that you are either being charged for the energy you're being produced, or you decide not to deliver that energy. What does it mean not to deliver your energy? You're literally sticking the wire that's coming out of your power plant and directly into the ground. Yeah. That electricity is disappearing. Yeah, and curtailment means energy going to waste. And this is the part that, I come from like kind of this like environmental, like back to the earth sort of like ethos. I'm like, wait, you guys think that this electricity that Bitcoin mining is consuming would have been consumed by somebody else? No, 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 no. That electricity is literally being dumped directly into planet Earth. And that's where it's going. So would you rather turn that into money that helps drive things forward and be efficient? Or would you rather that go directly into the ground? And it's pretty obvious that if we financialize that instead of wasting it, that we actually can incentivize a lot more power production.
I think that is such a brilliant explanation, especially for anyone who may be Bitcoin curious or even mining curious. That is like, oh, but I have some considerations around Bitcoin's energy use. There's just so much bad information available. And there is so much, I guess, I don't know, dark money or whatever is the thing that is driving those narratives, but they're very present. And people, have my mom who invests in Bitcoin, but is a huge environmentalist. Like we don't have like deep disagreements on things, but she still asks and wants more information around the contributions of Bitcoin to climate change. And I'm like, like I'm gonna have her listen to this. And yeah, I think that's a really strong explanation for people to get, like how profoundly this can improve our relationship to energy.
Yeah, thank you. And that really is our vision, is to transform how people relate to money and energy. And I think there's 2 points there. Is I have a lot of sympathy actually for people like your mother that are environmentalists and have their skepticism about Bitcoin. And I do believe that there is some narrative by some force out there that's being driven through, because when you actually pull all the way back and see the forest for the trees, there's 2 numbers that I always come back to with Bitcoin mining. The first is, what percentage of total energy on planet Earth is being consumed by Bitcoin mining? Mm-hmm. And that number is less than 0.5%, right? Like so the wedge of the pie is so small that if you really want to come after anything, doesn't it make sense to look at what the big wedges are? And focus on those. So why is it that we have every environmentalist in the world focused in on the least impactful part of that pie? And that's the question that I like to ask, because that question is like, okay, I'm sorry, but if you're an environmentalist and you're really believing Bitcoin is causing climate change, like somebody's got you by the short hairs. And they've got you spun around their finger, and you got to rethink things. And I don't mean that in a rude, disrespectful way. It's just like the big picture is that it's not that big a deal. And then the second number that I like to share is, it's already the cleanest industry in the world at 58% renewable energy. Like there's no other industry that's already being driven off such a high percentage of renewables. And you put those 2 together, and it's just like, Yeah, there's something at play. And how I like to talk about it is that, Bitcoin's a network. There's no marketing or PR budget for Bitcoin, right? There's just a bunch of individual blokes and gals like yourself that are running around talking about this stuff, but there's no cohesive, hey, we are the voice of Bitcoin and we're going to get out there in front of the press and say this and say that. And that's what occurs everywhere else. Like, we are so unused to in our society dealing with a decentralized network that we don't actually know how to perceive it appropriately.
Yep. No, Bitcoin has done what like Madison Avenue will never be able to do. It's like the best brand in the history of all brands. And yeah, I also like the Greenpeace. I'm like the Greenpeace like kind of hit job that was put out a few weeks ago. I'm like, Greenpeace partnering with Goldman Sachs tells you just like everything you need to know about where we're at. So I'm like, if that is not, and when I did bring that up to her, she was like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm like, yeah, I mean, they're not going to make it obvious, but you follow the money, which is why we need something like Bitcoin. And I think, yeah, the human brain is just so used to being fed up perfectly served ads on a platter to get you to hone in on like, indulging at every whim when you're on the internet. You're not used to like not being coerced. We're just not used to our consumer behavior living in peace with something that we want, like Bitcoin.
Yeah, and what I think is actually really fantastic about Bitcoin is it's actually, I'm just realizing as I'm talking to you that it forced me at least to ask the question, what is money? Right. And that leads you, if you're intellectually honest, that's basically an endless pursuit. Like, you can pursue that to the end of your life. What is money? But it's also now with Bitcoin mining coming into the center stage, doing the next most wonderful thing, because it's forcing people to ask the question, what is energy and how do we use it? And that is actually something that I realized, close to 2 decades ago when I got into solar, is something that people do not understand, is the grid and how it operates and how we consume energy in our lives. And that lack of understanding leads to easy manipulation and distortion of how people see things. But I see in the Bitcoin community where people are getting more aware of how the grid operates, how things work with energy. And I think that as that spreads further and further, because I believe it will actually help us with climate change in other ways too, because the more of us that understand how we actually produce and consume electricity, the less we'll get into these situations where we have politics wanting to help with climate change and politicians putting incentives in place to help with climate change. But then the people actually operating the electric grid are saying, hey guys, the things you've asked us to do actually are going to make a dysfunctional grid and not being listened to, because that's actually what's happened in a lot of places. So like California, where I've sold a lot of solar systems, there's a somewhat dysfunctional grid there now. And it's not because of anybody in the solar industry doing anything wrong or anybody there. It's for just a basic lack of politics understanding electricity. Like, that's simple. Like, there's basics to electrons running around on wires, and if you don't obey the laws of physics, everything else breaks down. I'm sorry.
That is a very good part. That is like a very good thing to keep in mind. If you don't obey those laws of physics, everything else starts to fall apart. All right. So I know I said that was my last question, but this is my real last question that I do ask.
No.
It's just one more. What are you concerned about in Bitcoin that enough people maybe aren't talking about?
Wow, I've never been asked that question. Yeah, I think so as a Bitcoiner, I think you constantly are thinking about how does this network get attacked and taken down? And I think the only approach that I can see right now that could be done is a speculative attack on Bitcoin by way of naked short selling, but it would have to be done at a government level. And so what that looks like is actually cranking up the printing press, driving inflation of the local currency, but continually using that currency to short sell Bitcoin to suppress the price. I think that is the one attack that I see feasible that would suppress the price for a long time, but eventually the supply of Bitcoin will dry up and inflation will cause that local country to get to the point of starvation. And I'm not claiming that this is actually what's going on right now, but it could be like one of many possible reasons why the price of Bitcoin isn't higher than it should be right now, because you can see the supply both dropping, but the price continued to be suppressed. There could be some large players trying to play that game to suppress the price. The beauty of Bitcoin, though, is that it can't be suppressed forever, because there's too many people that are just going to continue to hold. And at some point, there literally will not be supply to purchase. And at that point, we're going to see the mother of all short squeezes, and, you know, like a $20,000, $30,000 day or something, if that ever occurs, which that's when you break the short sellers that are doing that type of activity. So anyway, what I see the biggest risk to Bitcoin is the traditional financial system trying to figure out ways to suppress the price, keeping people away and slowing adoption. But even over the long term, I don't see how that's a true long-term risk.
Yeah, and it seems like there would have to be such a mindset of like, I'll show you, I'll hurt myself. Like the banks would have to say to them, we'll show the Bitcoiners, we'll harm ourselves. And it's like, you're just not dealing with rational actors. So how many things would have to go wrong? But I know the evil of the Federal Reserve knows no bounds. So I appreciate that answer. All right, so Ken, where can we find out more about Sazmining, follow you on social, learn more about minting, printing, mining our own Bitcoin at home? Oh, not at home, but mining our own.
Yeah, so great question. Best way, so sazmining.com.
And we'll link to it.
Yeah, you've got my Twitter, you've got Sazmining's Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, but I would say those are sort of the three channels that we are publishing to the most. We also have a newsletter you can sign up for on our website. And I should also mention as well that we are through the aggregation of customer demand. Yeah, so the deposit's fully refundable. So if you just want to lock your place up in line and give yourself some space and time to think about it, you can do that. So, and I only mention that because spaces have been filling up quick.
All right, awesome. Well, I appreciate all of the insights that you shared. That was awesome. I definitely, every time I've listened to you guys speak, I've learned something new. So I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. It's been a fun conversation.
All right.